Welcome to Transform Your Workplace. I'm Brandon Laws, and I'm here with Lacey Partipilo and Toni Reynolds. Thanks
Hello.
for coming on.
Hi.
Well, this is going to be a fun discussion. It's like probably the first in-person discussion I've done in a couple of years.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking about burnout with the HR profession. You guys are both HR consultants and have been for many, many years. The last couple of years have been really hard for a lot of people due to the pandemic. And I'm just curious, like what are some of the things you're hearing from a burnout standpoint?
Yeah. Fatigue, exhaustion.
Yeah, it's pretty widespread. So I don't think that it's just people doing consulting. It's really just HR professionals in general.
Yeah.
In-house consultants, doesn't really matter. But you guys feel it. You have felt it for the last few years, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Do you have any like industry stats on
Yeah,
like,
I actually have some here. So
feeling?
this is from Expert HR, an article that they put out this January, David Weisenfeld. So he said that in a study that WorkVivo did, there was about 520 HR professionals that they surveyed. These stats are kind of sad. 98% of the folks in the survey expressed feeling burned out at work in the last 6 months. 78% of those folks are open to leaving their jobs, and 71% do not feel valued in their organization. One person was actually quoted saying, "I'm burning it at both ends of the stick, day in and day out since COVID. I'm exhausted. We need to take care of everyone else, but no one is taking care of us."
Yeah.
That's powerful. Mm-hmm. Did you feel that before the pandemic though? You personally?
I mean, honestly, I didn't feel it to this degree. So no, I think since the pandemic, HR professionals have just taken on so much more. We're supposed to be experts in things we have never even talked about or heard about.
That is so true. There's not a playbook for
No,
what?
and we were, like I told you, like flying building the plane while we were flying it. And there were moments I feel like where I have felt burnout in my career, but not for such a long period of time. And I think, when we were in it, we were talking about there's going to be a tail to this. And I think that tail is this compassion fatigue that so many of us are feeling.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of causes for burnout, right? I think being connected all the time doesn't help. Like for those that went remote, you're like on call after call after call and connected. Mm-hmm. So your life is kind of like, is it work? Is it life? My personal life? It just all kind of blends together. But you brought up compassion fatigue, which is the focus of this particular podcast episode. For those that don't know what compassion fatigue is, what is that? How would you describe it personally?
For me, I think it's this feeling of exhaustion from taking care of those people around us and having empathy and compassion and care for the people around us that are suffering. So that could be the leadership team within an organization. You're worried about the employees, you're worried about the employees' families, and it just weighs on you, and it's really tiring. And there are like physical effects, I think, even to that.
Yeah. I feel like
Toni, how would you
similar,
describe
but
it differently?
feeling like kind of starting to feel detached and kind of like you're working through the motions sometimes. Mm-hmm. I know HR people are by default pretty empathetic. So then it can be like, well, when does this end? Like, is the end near? Mm-hmm. So feeling a little bit just truly exhausted, like you just want to be done some days.
Like, what are some of the signs and symptoms that you've felt when you feel like this compassion fatigue or even burnout?
For me, like a hopelessness a little bit sometimes. And like really just ultimately feeling like, when will this end? Mm-hmm. And how do we stop this? When does it start? Like, and no one's there. It feels like no one's there for you.
Right.
And so often I feel like we're not walking the walk. We tell our clients and we tell our people, this is how you take care of yourselves. Call the EAP, do these things. And then we don't do them ourselves. Mm-hmm. So, wow. It's really taking that in.
Lacey, what about you? Do you think anything differently?
I think it can feel lonely, especially for an internal HR person. I never felt lonely because we had each other that we could lean on and talk to. I think a feeling that is unusual for me, but I notice it coming up when this is kind of bubbling, is like not caring. Because I'm a pretty caring person and I'm pretty invested in the clients that I work with and the people that I work with. And when I start to feel like I don't care anymore, it's that vessel is depleted. Mm-hmm. That's when I know, like, probably need to do something about this. Probably need to talk about it.
What's unique about you guys in particular is the fact that you're consultants. So you have team members that are also HR professionals versus if we're talking about an in-house HR person, they're truly on an island. In a lot of cases, so the loneliness of the compassion fatigue probably really takes hold with them. But the fact that you guys can recognize it in your teammates too, like have you noticed it with other people and have you called it out?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think my director will notice it in me. He'll be like, I can tell you've had a hard week. Like the way I'm talking about work or myself is at a higher, maybe a lesser version of myself. And then he's able to recognize that and be like, you need to take a break and step back. And I think we do that for each other. Like when people are talking back, it's a lot of times it's like self-talk, like, oh, I messed this up. I did this wrong. And you can recognize that in your teammates.
Yeah. And seeing it in client contacts that we work with, because we do wrap around and support a lot of internal HR people. And so trying to remind them, like, we don't have all the answers right now. We're getting there. And having that empathy for them, that I know the pressure that they're being faced with from the leaders that they report to, and trying to maybe do some of the self-talk that probably should be doing on myself, giving that a little bit to them. I think that was happening a lot during the pandemic, for sure.
I mean, we talk about the pandemic and a little bit of why maybe it heightened the compassion fatigue, but I mean, from your perspective, what about the pandemic makes you feel the way you do?
I think there was well-being issues going on. Like we were really talking about health and humanity, and it was polarizing. So people had strong emotional reactions to regulations and rules, and people were being laid off. And so employees had family members who there was income, shortage issues, and people were stuck in their homes. So mental health became an issue. So it wasn't just the volume of work. I feel like burnout is more, there's too much work to do and not enough resources. That's how I feel when I'm getting burned out. Yeah. This is more the issues are at a level where your heart is like pulled, and I think that's what was different about the pandemic. People were suffering.
In some terms, like some people, it was life and death, right? And people were really talking about that, and maybe like COVID itself didn't affect me personally, maybe it was affecting our clients and to a greater length than it was us. So it was like we were really feeling that, and things were happening at just a magnitude that was just hard to grasp.
And I think the challenging thing about the pandemic is that no workforce and no employee base is created equal. You have some that could go remote. You have some that had to still be there. And so as an HR professional, you're trying to support those organizations who have employees that are both possibly remote and in person. And the rules, they were so crazy. And so like you're all in, but you're not taking care of yourself, are you?
No, and you're trying to keep up with even what are the best practices, and then the best practices were changing, and we get advice from CDC that's one thing, and a lawyer that's something else, right. And you were being looked to be the one who could sort of synthesize all of it and then come up with a plan that not only was lawful but also fit the workplace, and that pressure was real.
And people didn't always like our answer or our recommendation, and so they wanted us to say something as fact, and it wasn't. And so it felt like we just couldn't get the right answer to the right people, and it
seemed like the facts were changing like every week.
Always,
so it's like you would advise a client on something, and it's like, and how do you keep up with that? You're probably just like, what
thank
next?
Goodness we have a compliance team, so that made a big difference, and just the way that we share knowledge at Xenium, I think. And there are resources. Sherm did a great job of putting out information, so we're able to keep up on it. But honestly, it was like day by day, what's different. The pace that we were working at is like nothing I have experienced in the almost 20 years of doing it.
Like when we dive into like the feeling of compassion fatigue is like feeling is, for empaths, it could probably recognize this on a regular basis, where it's like you feeling so deeply what others are feeling, and you're like almost bearing the weight of that. Were there any specific examples that you can think of during the pandemic, supporting clients, supporting your teammates, that really heightened that feeling for you?
I had a client that had an outbreak at their work site during the pandemic, and 100-person group, about 25% of the employees had COVID. An older workforce, some of them, it was not life-threatening, but could have been. And so getting on the county's radar and OSHA's radar because of that outbreak. We had to report it. And the pressure that the internal HR person there felt, like, it was real. And I was so worried about wrapping around her and supporting her, and worried about the employees. And also at the same time that happened was when we had the fires here. And so that many of their employees lived in that community, and 2 employees' homes burned down. And so it would just, that for me, I just remember it feeling so heavy and so just emotional for a lot of people. And it's an employer that really cares about their people. Right. And so everybody was feeling a lot at that time.
I'm sure you feel like you're not doing enough ever.
Oh,
it never felt like there was enough. And how many times can you say call the EAP? And not like that's not a great resource, but like at the end of the day, some of the employees just needed to like not have COVID and not, and people needed to just wear masks so that other people didn't get COVID at work. And it got to be pretty exhausting for everybody involved.
What about you, Toni?
With that, like, the other things didn't stop either. So like employee relations in general, it's not like we were only dealing with COVID. There was like everything else on top of that. People were still fighting at work. Unfortunate things were still happening. People were losing their jobs. So you're dealing with all of that on top of COVID. And it's like, it just felt like it was like you were drinking from a fire hose, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And employers were still, wanting to be strategic and work through, some of the strategy and design of their HR program. So trying to do that, get smart about how do you take into account all of this other stuff while we're building these things. I think all of that compounding is what created this problem that we have, and honestly probably still have. There are probably still HR professionals that have not come up for air yet and addressed what those feelings are really doing.
Honestly, and thinking about like this discussion right here, there's so many professions that probably feel this. Therapists, nurses, doctors, like they probably bring the weight of everything that's happening home with them. But if you could speak to your profession, or even your practices that you use personally, like how do you manage some of this? How do you separate yourself between the consulting work that you do and feeling like I'm not doing enough, or I need to be doing more, and oh my gosh, they're going through all this, and you feel it too. How do you cut it off?
I really try to control my calendar and control like my work-life balance. Luckily here, we're really good about that, but it's making sure I'm setting boundaries for myself. And that's something I preach to my clients as well as to other people in our industry.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same for me. Little things like, trying to make it a point to pick my kiddo up from school. So when we were working from home, like there was something about leaving the house, going to his daycare, picking him up and bringing him home that like some separation. Cause that back to back that got created where you're just being needed 8, 9, 10 meetings in a day. It got to be exhausting. Now that we're in this hybrid, coming to the office 2 days a week for me is so good for that separation and those boundaries. And I think the other thing is just talking about it. I'm an external processor, obviously, clearly. So I've found people that when I'm having a hard time that I can talk through that with, and we can joke and laugh and problem solve and lean on, and that I do think that makes a big difference.
I agree with that for sure. Having people you can like joke about it. That's kind of how I process things, with a joking mentality. And so being able to like laugh with people, break that like emotional burden, talk it out. That's what's great about having a room full of HR people. You can actually speak about the things.
True. Yeah. I remember early in the pandemic, a lot of us were sharing like Instagram reels or whatever they were called at the time, stories, where you're like, they're, poking fun at this, at the work-life balance stuff. And it was just kind of fun to like, okay, this is, it's all relatable. Like we're going through the same stuff together. Yeah. So I agree, like processing in some way, whether it's talking about it out loud or just sharing a stupid Instagram, like, satirical things is helpful. How else do you guys manage the stress and the things that come with HR or just compassion fatigue in general?
Exercise, getting outside, getting help if you need it, EAP.
I was going to say, like, I think even, from time to time accessing some of those more professional resoures for me in my life for a variety of reasons has been supportive and helpful. I think just knowing kind of how I start showing up and when it's happening, trying to get ahead of that before it becomes really hard to dig out of is important for me. So I kind of know what those things are, and people that are close to me can help kind of say, like you said, your manager, like, hey, Lacey, it's looking like we're not in a good spot. What do you need? I have people in my life that can help me be accountable to that.
But trust in relationships is like key to that.
Oh, absolutely. You have to have that. Could go a little sideways.
Yeah, it starts with relationships for sure. Toni, anything you'd add to that?
I guess just, taking care of yourself and practicing what you preach is really important. And I try to do that. There's so many days where I'm like, tell my coworkers, I'm like, oh, well, don't work till 9 if you're feeling overwhelmed. And then I find myself online at 9 and I'm like, I just told them not to do this. So doing things that like I know I shouldn't be doing and just taking care of myself. I get a massage. I try to once a month.
Yeah.
I just had one on Tuesday. It's great.
So jealous.
I told everyone.
It's the second time I've heard about it.
That's amazing.
Things like that. I just do things that you enjoy.
Yeah.
Is it playing with your dog? Is it with your kiddos? What is it? And making sure you're making time for that and working somewhere that allows that.
Yeah. I mean, as a leader too, who might have people, speak to people listening to this, like you have people who how do you recognize this and what do you encourage them to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tough to I mean, I think build that trust, like we've been talking about, build that trust with your people, make sure that they trust you, can communicate with you and are open. And then when they're saying they're burnt out or tired or listen,
Mm-hmm.
like really try to understand, like, I hear this person telling me this is really tough.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to see how I can support them and what that looks like.
I think if you have regular one-on-ones with employees, you need a vehicle and a format to get that information.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times folks are going to kind of come inwards and maybe not want to ask for that help. And so if you have a format within your one-on-ones where you're asking for what resources do you need? How are you doing? We even in some leadership team groups that we did last year, we kind of did this thing where we were rating scale of 1 to 10. How's your personal, how's your family, and how's work?
It's helpful.
And then kind of dialoguing about why is family only a 5 right now? Or why is personal a 10? What's going well? So I think finding ways to get that information is important. Also, I mean, we do pulse checks, employee surveys. Like, there are ways to see how is your group doing as a whole.
Yeah.
And I think when you do that, then you're able to build programs and find resources that help everyone. So it's not just the one-to-one problem solving, but we're looking at it more holistically.
I agree with that. Yeah.
So, I mean, if you do all those things, are you still going to feel compassion fatigue? I feel like this isn't going away.
Yeah.
I think you might, but I think good habits and good practices can help. I sure hope we don't get to a place where we were, in the pandemic. And I think the problem became such a problem because we just weren't prepared for it. And now we know, and I think we'll do better. Right. If there is a kind of more crisis situation where it's sort of all hands on deck on something new.
You know what I think about? This is so dumb, but because pandemic's kind of rear view mirror, but now it's like recession possibilities and tech companies laying off people like crazy. And the movie Up in the Air comes to mind with George Clooney, Anna Kendrick.
People have always asked, is that what your job is?
No, it's not what your job is, but like the cold-heartedness of that transaction was always interesting, because now we're talking about the opposite. It's like, no, you're going to like have to help terminate somebody and you feel what they're feeling. Like you see it on their face. Like, talk to me about that.
I think people think that sometimes it's just like we don't care about what's happening, and it's because we have like a script that we're kind of going off of, but we are trying to be there for people and be supportive, and it can just feel like you're not giving enough too. And when we're called in usually to the worst of the worst, like terminations, other employee relations issues, so it can just kind of feel like a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think about back in 2008, 2009, because I was doing this then too, and it was really hard. And I obviously have a lot more experience now and more perspective now into what that all meant for folks that were getting laid off. But I think no matter how many separations you do or how many layoffs you're a part of, they're hard. And so I think, you know, I always tell when I hear business partners that have to go out and do a layoff at a client, I'm like, are you booked up after that? Did you take some time for yourself? What are you doing tomorrow? Like, do you have client meetings? Because you go into it and we're just so programmed to we want to get the work done. We want to be there for the employee, and the kind of those feelings that pop up afterwards, we're not prepared always to deal with them, but then there's work to do. So you don't deal with them. And I think that's when compassion fatigue becomes an issue, and it builds up.
The thing that I always think about is like, you go through something like that, I'm like, you're taking that shit home with you. And depending on if you have kids, a spouse, partner, whatever it may be, how do you make sure that there's time in between that moment where you're supporting through a really tough place, and then you can separate and then go home and be who you are?
You need to decompress.
You do.
You need time. Otherwise, for me, it's like I just take it all in and I just like don't talk about it. And I think other people maybe take it out on others.
Exactly.
And
that's what I worry about.
Neither is healthy. Neither is good, because that stuffing down ends up bubbling up somehow.
Yeah. That's why I really do like to go on site for those, because I do have that drive back to decompress and process it through my mind and just think like, how did that go? Yeah. You know, talk myself up a little bit too, and make sure I'm feeling okay, and talk to the people who I know who can support on it if I'm feeling down, because you never know how those conversations are going to go. And sometimes they can be really hard, like worse than you would expect. And those can be especially daunting when you don't have all the right answers for those people.
Yeah. If business leaders are listening to this, like if you walk away with one thing, I just hope that like if you're a president, you're a CEO, you're a manager, check in on that HR person that had to do that termination meeting, because I think they would be surprised, because that doesn't happen. We don't get checked in on very often. I think HR people are checking in on the manager and how that felt for them when they go in, you know, how are you doing? So it's hard. And I think even just somebody saying, how you doing? That sounds like that was a hard meeting, or I think it's been a long week. I think even that is uplifting, at least for me.
Me too.
Check in with me.
And also a thank you goes a long way.
Yeah.
Can we please get some recognition from the HR people?
Yeah.
Thank yous truly go a a long way. I think
we do get a lot of gratitude from clients.
Consulting is a lot easier, but I'm talking more internal HR.
Like
I feel like that was
a thankless
job. Truly, like people were like, HR and you'll handle everything. Thanks, job.
It's true when you're in-house. Like, I'm an in-house marketing person inside of an HR company. So, I could be an afterthought too, you know, a little bit. And so, like, for most HR people, they're in-house, and you know, their business or organization does something else besides HR. So they're on an island. You know, they're on an island. They're
usually the people not enjoying the party. They're the one like running the party, you know. And I think people forget about that.
Shitty stuff.
Yeah, well, like if there's literally a party going on, they're usually the one like filling the cooler. That's what they're actually the person doing those things. So I think just giving them a break too. Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to say on this? I mean, this is a good discussion.
No, I think how we ended this with like, thanks goes a long way. How you doing goes a long way. I think that could make a difference. But just take care of yourself and each other.
Yeah, take care of yourself, each other, your HR people. Give them a pat on the back. I don't know. A nice laugh goes along. Laugh with your HR people. They're humans too.
HR, they are actually some of the best humor.
Some of the best.
Some of the most foul-mouthed people I've ever been around.
No way.
Not you.
No.
Well, Toni, Reynolds, Lacey, Partipilo, thanks for being part of the podcast. This is so much fun.
Thanks for having us. It's great.